This is Leisha Holmes, and I'm your host on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast, brought to you by Hoxo Media. And I am beyond excited today, a little bit in awe, which I know I'm not supposed to say, but I'm going to say that anyway. We are joined today by Professor Damian Hughes, who I approached having become a huge fan, as he's the co-host on the incredible podcast, if you've not already listened to it, the High Performance Podcast, which he co-hosts with Jake Humphreys. Welcome to you today, Damian. How are you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Leisha. And I'm honoured to be asked to come on the Recruiters Recruitment Podcast. So thanks for the invitation.
In case you forget, we have got a poster behind me. So for those watching on YouTube, you know that, but those that listen in, it's just so I know what I'm doing as well, in case I forget. I've been a huge podcast fan for months and months and months. And for me, certainly since COVID began, it has been how I personally have kept myself motivated. It's how I've kept learning. I talk out.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah, and you've had the most incredible guests. And I tell everybody, and I do often share it on my LinkedIn. So when
thank you.
Come on, I just think, you know, for those who aren't yet familiar with you and your podcast, do you want to give us an overview of what you do, what your business does, and why I've asked you to come on today?
Yeah, cool. So the way I explain it is it's easier to explain it in three lenses. One of the jobs I do is I'm a visiting professor at Manchester Metropolitan University, looking at organisational psychology and change. So what does that do? It's basically, how do you bring a team together, create a high performing culture where people can stay tight, stay high performing even when they come under pressure.
Yeah.
That informs what my business does, Leisha, that I run a consultancy where I work with teams that look at how do you create high performing cultures. So I do quite a lot in business, but most of my work is in the world of elite sport, working with coaches that do that. And then the third job I do is I write books, and I now co-host the High Performance Podcast, where we sit down with people and just try and talk to them around how do you do what you do around these areas of culture and sustaining high performance, and get them to explain it. So they're the three jobs that I do, really. So hopefully that gives people a bit of an insight into my background.
Definitely. And anyone that is listening, and we call our audience aspiring leaders and those who are already leaders across the recruitment industry. And we are very proud that we have a global audience. It's about 60% UK. The rest is America, Pan Asia, Europe. So it's growing every single month. So
well done. Because I know how hard it is, Leisha, to sort of get cut through the noise when you're doing a podcast. So you've done phenomenally well. So congratulations.
That's down to the caliber of guests that I invite on, and yourself included. So for anyone that's listening and wondering why I've asked Damian to come on, this is why. Because as an industry, we are regarded as high performers. And when I'm speaking to my clients who are recruitment agency business owners across the UK, in the Northwest, they seek the high elite. So the first question you ask any guest, and I am sorry if I'm being a little bit facetious asking you this question, but I'm going to ask it.
That's all right. Go for it.
The first question is, what is high performance?
What is high performance? Yeah, you're right. So we always ask that question first of all, because there is no definition of high performance. That's an important point to make, that, you know, for somebody that might, I'd take a really simple example like the Olympics coming up in a couple of weeks, that for some of the athletes, it might be winning a gold medal. For somebody else, it might just be getting on that starting line, is what their definition is. And that's why it's important to clarify it. I think over the course of this series we've done, we currently just recorded the sixth series of it. I think it's sort of challenged a lot of my preconceptions, and I can sum up high performance now in 13 words, which is do the best you can with what you've got in the moment you're in. And what that means is, I think it's about that we all start from different places. So it's about, in that moment that you're in, with the resources that you have, just giving your absolute all to it. Mm-hmm. Now, you might look back on it in years to come and go, I could have done better. Yeah, but that's a different moment. Your knowledge you have then, years later, is different than what you had in that moment. So it's constantly about just, in that time you're in, giving the best you've got and using the knowledge and the resources to the best advantage.
And I know, and having listened to a number of your guests when you've sort of talked around that, and I love that definition. We're going to definitely take that and make that as the title. It then comes down to somebody's why, and the why is always going to be different, and it should always be authentic. And this is what, I'm not saying it frustrates me, but I think it's important to contextualize what that actually looks like. And I'll often challenge my clients when they talk about high performance, because it does come down to why.
Yeah, very much. So again, when we talk about motivation, that I sometimes get asked by businesses and people go, "Oh, you're a motivational speaker." You go, "No, don't be silly. I'm not motivating anybody," because motivation is often one of these terms that people say, "I can't motivate you. You can't motivate me." The only person, the etymology of it is, why do you do anything? Why did you set up this podcast? Why are we chatting today? You have to answer that question as an individual. And when you boil it down to its essence, Lisa, there's three reasons why you do anything. You do it through desperation, rationalization, or inspiration. So what do I mean by them? Well, when you hear people go, "I've got to do this," or "I've been told I've got to do this," they're doing it through desperation. They don't feel they've got much of a choice. So it's almost about it, they're doing it under sufferance. When you do it through rationalization, the language there is different. People go, "I should do it really. It's probably where I'll get best paid. It's probably the best use of my time and resources." So it's almost like they're bringing their head to it, but they're not necessarily bringing their heart. Yet when you do things through inspiration, you go, "I love doing this. I get to do this. This is brilliant. I really enjoy doing it." And that's where you bring in both your head and your heart to it. And that's where they're all valid. They're all valid reasons, but the one that will sustain you through tough times, through difficult moments, through times when despair sets in, is always going to be when you do it through a sense of inspiration.
It's the natural flow, isn't it? It's really interesting you talk about that, and maybe it would be useful for leaders who are listening to this, thinking, well, how can we get people to? Well, how can we understand where people are within that triage? Is to actually write down the parts of the job where they feel that it's desperation.
Yeah.
Middle one.
And there'll always be. So like so motivation isn't like a one size fits all thing. So there might be things like filling in your spreadsheets where you do it through desperation. I've got to do it.
Yeah.
But there might be other parts of your job of meeting a client where you go, "Oh, I'll get to do this." So it's not that you're motivated to do one job and that's everything. In your job, there'll be different aspects of it that give you that you draw on different modes and drivers of motivation for.
But in terms of, if we talk about it in context of high performance, if we can get more people to do the bit where it's inspiring, their desire, their motivation, their continual, if they're looking to develop themselves, that's more likely to create their level of performance than someone that's
definitely. So there's really interesting work on this by a psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, right? It's a difficult name to pronounce, but it's a four-letter word that most people are familiar with, which is flow. Okay. When you do things because you really want to do it, you eventually find yourself in a state of flow where you're just doing it because you love doing it. It's about time passes and you don't even realize it because you're just immersed in the task. And I think for high performance to really occur, you need to find those moments of flow. What lights your fire? What lights your soul on fire? And go and spend as much time in there as you possibly can.
Definitely. I'm a huge advocate of that. And I have been I went through a process about 4 years ago with the most incredible coaching company that specialised in the recruitment sector, Katie Green and Nick. And that's exactly what they asked us to do as a process internally for all the leaders that went on it. What was the flow of ourselves as leaders, but also of our team. And it just
brilliant. Okay.
And it does hold. You mentioned there a little bit earlier on about when the poo hits the fan, which it did for most business leaders last year, but on a continual basis. So I think it's a really useful piece of advice. And for those leaders who are listening, I think it's such an easy technique to find out what makes your team flow individually and get them to do that.
Well, I think that, like, again, there's lots of different metaphors out there on this, Alicia, but I think I often like the Jim Collins talks about the hedgehog effect. So what drives your economic engine? What do you love doing? And what are you better at than anyone else? And when you find that sweet spot that in the middle of all of that stuff, that's where you're flying, both professionally and personally.
And it is a combination, isn't it? Oh, thank you for that. I think that everybody will be jotting down as they're listening to this, and I think that's an absolute piece of gold. It really is. I mean, you've between yourself and Jake, you have interviewed so many incredible leaders across all different industries and all different walks of life. Sport and obviously retail, from business, and it's been just amazing to listen to this plethora of experience and how they all are. It's just such an enjoyable podcast, and I find it. Because there are some out there that are quite patronising to listen to, and yours just isn't, which is why I approached you about it. And
Oh, well, thank you. That's really kind. Because you'll know a bit like with a podcast, like what you're doing. Sometimes, like you put it out there in the world, don't you? And it's like it's like you give birth to a child, and
yeah,
then and then you grow it, and then you send it out into the world, and it's almost like how people then receive it and interact with it is none of your business in many ways. And often, you don't really know how people are listening to it or where they're listening to it. So it's a real privilege when people like yourself are really kind to give that kind of feedback. So thank you.
Loads of my listeners do listen to you as well. Oh, I'm always listening to it up Holcombe Hill. For anybody that walks.
Oh, nice. Oh, well, thanks for taking us with you.
And wave you down to Manchester. I've got an interesting question for you though. So those who are listening who are already leaders or aspiring leaders, do you think you are born a natural leader, or is it something you can train yourself to become?
Well, that's a really good question. This is the nature-nurture debate, isn't it? That, in short, and I think the answer is that there is no answer to that. I think we're all like how much of us are born and how much of us are made. The answer is that nobody knows, and anyone that gives you a definitive answer is a liar or they don't understand it. Is the essence.
Yeah.
So what I'd say is we have a certain level of traits that we're born with, the personality traits, and that's undeniable. But the point is that the vast majority of the way that we operate in our adult lives is learned behaviour. So by definition, if you learn it, you can unlearn some of those things as well. So the example I often use is, grown-ups that'll still have temper tantrums when they don't get their own way. Yeah. And the answer is, of course, we all do. Now, you say, so what they weren't born having temper tantrums, but they've learned over time that if I shout for loud enough and long enough, eventually everyone gives me my own way. That's a learned behaviour. So as an adult, you do it, you have a tantrum, just in an adult version of it. And I think what that leads us to then is the fact that we do have certain natural traits, but we can learn to enhance them. We can learn to amplify them and make the best out of those traits to therefore have the biggest impact on other people and learn and become a leader. But I think there's certain aspects of us that, even like when people talk about kids these days, like I know you've got children yourself, Leisha, and as I do, I think that one of the things that often irritates me is when people talk about, oh, kids are different these days. And you go, compared to when? Yeah. They go 30 years ago, and you say, so you don't believe that society's changed in any other way than 30 years ago. So they just respond differently to conditions. But if people went and spoke about people based on race or their gender in the same way of, oh, women are different these days, it'd be offensive to do that. And I think the reason I make this point is that I think that as human beings, we haven't evolved that fast, and there's certain things that we all need to be led, or we want to be part of something. And I think you want somebody that demonstrates trust, behaves with authenticity. Well, we can all learn to do that. You want somebody that creates a sense of belonging. We can all learn to do that. Yeah. And you want somebody that gives us an element of control, which we can all learn to do. So I think we can amplify our qualities that we're born with, our characteristics, but the vast majority of it we can learn if we've got a disposition and an open mind to do it.
It's a very interesting debate, and within specifically recruitment, just to sort of bring it back to my audience, this is down to those high performers. So in recruitment, obviously, you get those who are top billers. You know, all they do is recruit all day, and they often get pushed into these leadership roles, whereas actually they should just be left to make the money and be the cash cow. And they actually tend to make pretty poor leaders because they're not very altruistic. They're not, they are people that can create trust and they create belonging. Yeah. They're in it for themselves ultimately. And I often encourage leaders to maybe look away. Maybe it won't be your top biller, but it'll be somebody who has got those natural leadership qualities that you can then amplify. I love that word. So that's why I've asked that question, because it's something that
right. Okay. Yeah, I think it's a Peter principle, isn't it? Often you get promoted to your level of incompetence. I can really empathise with this. That I did a corporate job years ago, and I got promoted to my level of incompetence, where I love working with teams and creating these high performing cultures I describe about, and sort of then getting in the nuts and bolts of it. And I got promoted to a director level, which involves sat in meetings all day. Now, I'm not somebody who should put in a meeting for very long. Like, I get bored, restless.
Is it normal? Did you start flicking with your pen and things?
No, what I did was I ended up, true story, I ended up writing a book in my meetings. I just sat and wrote, but where it dawned on me was the last job I had in the corporate world when I was employed in it was out in South Africa, right? And I was in Durban, and this will give you an idea of when we talk about passion and sort of sense of purpose. We were sat in this boardroom and it overlooked the Indian Ocean, right? And it was beautiful outside. And I remember sat there thinking, I'd give anything to be out there now. And we were talking about margarine sales in the region, right? And the sales had dipped. And I remember sat there thinking, there's not 1 ounce of me cares. I don't care. I don't care that the sales have dipped. I'm not bothered. And I watched this conversation go around the table, and it was like creeping death. And I watched all my colleagues looking really upset and crestfallen. And I remember as it came to me, I remember thinking, should I just say, I couldn't give a shit, I'm not bothered. And to my shame, I didn't. I faked being upset like everyone else did. And I was that ashamed of myself that night. I went home, I had my flat out in Durban, and I went back to my flat and I thought, I can't do this for another 30 years. I'm not prepared to be a fraud of pretending to care about stuff that I don't. And that was the day that I always say mentally I resigned. It took me a while. It took me another 12 months to pluck up the courage to physically follow through. But yeah, we've got to aim to find those moments where we're living a life in congruence, in flow.
And I think that, you know, from my point of view, obviously I'm on the receiving end of plenty of people who have maybe gone through that, you know, and I love the pun there, margarine and the sales dip. Sorry, I've just chuckled at my own joke. Where they've proverbially sat around a table, or maybe not, they've been sat at home and they're feeling a bit disconnected from that world. And I'm just a huge believer that, you know, you've got to find what you're good at. And if you are somebody that's been maybe forced into a leadership role, maybe we question that, because I get plenty. I think the main reason people leave jobs is because they have a leader that isn't a natural leader. That's really generally why they tend to leave.
It's really interesting you say that. Like, one of the guys we interviewed on the podcast was James Timpson. So he runs like the Timpson, the shoe repair shop and the key cutting business. And they do all these employee engagement surveys and things like that. And he said, you know what? He said, the only question that really counts on that survey is, how do you get on with your boss?
Yeah.
Because he said, they won't leave the business, but they'll leave a boss.
Yes.
And that's the point, that if you're working for somebody that shouldn't be doing that job, that like the ripple effect, the collateral damage from it is massive.
People don't leave companies, they leave leaders. That's the truth.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're right.
23 years in recruitment, that is categorically, especially now we're in this bounce, which is, you know, no one would have predicted. It's not even a bounce. It's like, you know, we've gone to space, never mind Richard Branson and Elon Musk. We are in space with the needs of companies. It's amazing as an industry how we've recovered, and that companies that had to pause everything last year are now having to retrospectively cover all the recruitment that was needed, and now also focus on growth for the next however many years, 10 years. It's an amazing time to be a recruiter. And to those leaders that are sort of listening in, you know, hold on to your seats. But it's really important that we ask the next question, which is around mindset, which I know is something that LiquidThinker really focuses on, because I've had some very open, honest conversations with my clients over the last 18 months, because I was one of the first people to share vulnerability. And, you know, it was pretty scary being a business owner. It doesn't matter what size your business, there's 3 of us, but it was a very daunting place. And I think that the environment has changed now. People are a lot more open around that, and people openly admitted to having, you know, a mindset that was a little bit sort of more focused on, you know, worry and stress, and hopefully people are kind of coming through the other side. But for those who maybe haven't yet recovered their mindset, have you got any sort of top tips around how to convert your mindset back, or what you can do to protect it, to ensure it's a winning open mindset rather than a fixed one?
Yeah, so there's a few questions there, Alicia, that contained within that. So if I take them in turn, the first thing what I would say to anybody that maybe is struggling or having a bit of a tough time is just be kind to yourself. And I know that kindness sounds a bit twee, and maybe it's not the kind of language that you use normally, but just learn to be kind to yourself. You know what? We all have tough times. We all get put on our arse. We all have moments where we're not sure we can take the next step. And I think when you're kind to yourself, it then gives you eventually the capacity to be kind to other people as well. Totally. You know, so I think that has to be such an important first step for anybody here, because again, it gives you permission to say, I'm struggling a bit here. You know, I'm not finding this particularly easy. So, yeah, and I say that having ignored that advice myself for so long. I remember I got seriously ill a number of years ago where I wasn't kind to myself. I pushed myself beyond my physical limits in terms of I had all the warning signs. I was getting poorly, I was getting run down, I wasn't shaking it off. And I had this internal narrative that was like, just get on with it, stop whinging, don't moan, just man up, that ridiculous phrase. And I ended up contracting meningitis. And when I was in the hospital, the doctor had said, he said, listen, you're just unlucky, but you were run down enough, you were going to get an illness, you just got meningitis. And that sort of resonated with me, but where it sort of came to a head was when I became a dad. I remember somebody asking me, how would you feel if somebody spoke to your son in the way that you speak to yourself? No. And the thought horrified me. And I thought, Jesus, I'd kill anyone if they ever spoke to my son in the way that I've been doing to myself for years. And then I thought, I've got to start role modeling better behaviours, which is about kindness being a non-negotiable in many ways. So that's where I would start from there, because what that then allows you to do is when you're kind, you then open yourself up to influences or to other people that can maybe help you. And that goes into the second half of your question, which was about how do you have an open mind? Well, first of all, you have to be open for feedback. You have to be open to the right feedback from the right people.
Yeah.
But people can only do that when they feel that you're going to listen, or when you go and ask for it and you seek it out, rather than feel that it's incumbent on them to give it to you. So to really they sound simple, not necessarily simple to implement, is start by being kind to yourself, giving yourself a bit of credit. And then secondly, that then gives you the opportunity to open up and go and ask for feedback from people that count.
Well, there's a couple of replies there. Thank you so much for that. First and foremost, anyone that knows me on a personal level, my family motto is be kind. And when I get asked,
nice.
Yeah, and when I get asked, we've actually got it all over on the light bulb boxes you have. We've got it all around the house and on boards everywhere. I've even got it on my WhatsApp. That's my status. Be kind.
Have you? Brilliant. That's nice. Well, I found it really interesting that when we first started the podcast, I removed myself a step. I took several steps backwards from the world of social media and promoting it. And part of it was because that kind of toxicity, that very first time we announced we were doing the podcast, the first comment underneath it was, like, I won't use the actual word, but it was a C-bomb. They dropped the C-bomb on us and said, and I looked at it and I thought, who said that? Like, did they know me? And I looked at them. Yeah. And it was my mum, but no, it wasn't. But so I looked at them and I didn't know the person. They didn't follow me or anything like that, but they'd chosen to do it. And I remember sort of like thinking, why would you do that? And then I spoke to my wife, and my wife said to me, you've got two choices. You either toughen up and accept it as part of the game, or you remove yourself from the conversation. And I went, you know what, I would have removed myself from the conversation. When I was growing up.
I get any keyboard warriors, anyone will vouch for this, I literally delete and block. I don't get engaged with them at all. But going back to the kindness thing, I think I've never had so many goosebumps as I had on the Mary Portas interview that you did. And as I was on that...
nice.
Her kindness culture, I bought her book. I bought the book, I can't remember the other book, and I was literally there on Amazon Books, like, buying me.
Was you? Oh, brilliant.
Because actually, I do think that we've changed in terms of what we want to surround ourselves with, and this is the message, isn't it? That we can still be very profitable businesses and successful business people and high performing leaders and high performing recruiters in my world. But actually, being kind, it starts with being kind to yourself, because then it all goes from there. So I love your advice, Damian. It's absolutely, it resonates so well with what my values.
Oh, nice, thank you.
So thank you for that. And I think if more people were kind to themselves, they could then be kind to other people too, and that's where it all starts. So it's
100%. Yeah. It goes in that order. Start by being kind to yourself, and then
really
you've got the capacity to do it for others.
It really resonates. Now, when we were off camera and you're asking me where I was, I'm at home. I don't know if you're at home. So where are we going to be working? Because I know that that's one of the things that your consultancy focuses on. It's all around sort of working culture. So we're in a hybrid, working from home, working from the office. What's the world of work going to look like, do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think an answer to that I'd sort of paraphrase what Jeff Bezos from Amazon says. He says, when people say what's going to be different in the next 10 years, he says, what's more helpful to ask is what's going to be the same?
Okay.
What's not going to be different? And I think when we start thinking of this hybrid world and how the ripple effects of post-pandemic are going to play out, I think rather than worry about what's going to be different, what's going to be the same, and what we know is there's three things that all human beings need. If you're going to feel that you can perform at your best, there's three things. The first thing is you need a sense of autonomy. And what that means is you need to be given control to work where you work best. Okay. So give people that trust that where you work best, and then we just trust that you'll get on with it. So give them a sense of control. Okay. So the easiest way to show how control plays out is when you think about going around like a casino, go and watch people blow on the dice before they roll the dice on in a game. Now the question is, what difference does your breath make on the number that dice is going to land on? And the answer is, well, none at all. But it's the illusion of control. It's the sense that you feel that you control it by blowing on it or choosing your lottery numbers on a Saturday night when you play the national lottery. It makes no odds, but it basically gives you a sense of control. So giving people that kind of autonomy to control where they work, when they work best is going to be key. Another thing that you're going to have is creating a sense of value for them. So giving people a sense that they get to do what they're good at, and you get to acknowledge what they're good at, and you get to just check in with them. Another thing is going to be then giving them a sense of belonging. It doesn't matter whether we're working remotely. One of the biggest predictors of mental health issues, such as depression, is when we feel isolated from a group, when we don't feel that we're part of something that's bigger than us. So that's not going out of fashion. However we choose to work in the next 10 years, we're not going to evolve that fast. Yeah. So control or autonomy, a sense of belonging and a sense of value are going to be consistent bedfellows for all of us.
Amazing advice. Honestly, this is just absolute, an essential podcast for anyone that's thinking about their business, where you're at now and where you want to get to. So my final question to you is,
go on.
In terms of my world, again, it's all about what we do is we attract and we retain the top talent for our client, but also for ourselves as business owners. So what would your top tips be in terms of engaging with top talent out there, both internally but also externally? What would your top advice be?
I'm hesitating in answering it because what I was going to say is I did some research for a book many years ago where I went around sort of elite environments looking at how do you engage elite performers so they can perform at the best. So I went around some of like the world's best sporting environments and meeting the coaches with it. And what I found, Leisha, was there was 5 things that were consistently present when it happened. And I use a really simple acronym called STEPS. Okay. So, and the reason I do that is anyone listening to this, it's almost like a bit of a mental shopping list that you go, right, there's 5 things and I can remember its steps. First thing is you need to have a sense of simplicity to it. You need to have a purpose that everyone can align behind. You can't be great at 10 things, but you can be great at one thing. So it's about that simple sense of purpose. The T bit is you need to create an environment where people can think for themselves. Okay. So that relates to psychological safety, the work of Amy Edmondson that says you can cock up, you can make mistakes, but that's where the thinking happens, where you learn for yourself. The E part is emotional intelligence. You need to have an environment where, what we've spoken about earlier, kindness dominates, where people treat you with respect and courtesy and all those factors. The P bit is it's got to be practical. It's got to mean something. You've got to have something tangible to show for it. And then the final one is stories. You've got to have a powerful story that people can coalesce and identify. So when you get those 5 things right, what I discovered in my research is top talent then feel the need to want to stay with you because you're addressing all of those needs.
Oh my gosh, what a way to end with Damian's 5 steps. So anyone that isn't jotting that down now and thinking about what they can do to ensure that. I love it. This has just been unbelievable. And I'm sure I've got about 1 million more questions, but I'm
thank you. Thanks for the invite.
And thank you for joining us. And, you know, fellow Mancunian, I think you are an incredible man. And, you know, we really appreciate taking time. And for anyone that hasn't yet listened to the High Performance Podcast, you absolutely have to subscribe. You need to listen. I promise you, it will be worth your time. You'll learn so much from every single episode. The value that you bring is incredible. But also, as a business as well, people might want to connect you and get you into their businesses. So we might see you in the recruitment industry. You never know.
Oh, well, to listen, I know that there's a lot of people under pressure, a lot of people sort of doing the best they can with what they've got in the moment they're in. So hopefully this helps, Leisha. But if the High Performance Podcast can, or if anyone's got any questions that they want to follow up on, they're more than welcome to get in touch, and I'll happily help.
Kind of you to join us today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Damian. We really appreciate it.
No, I've loved it. Thank you.